attending today's panel, distinguished panel. We're going to be talking about the future of cannabis in Hawaii. Just a little bit of background about myself, in addition to my professional affiliation. I was born and raised in Honolulu, Marino, class of '91. I spent 25 years in California, going to undergraduate school, to law school, and working around the California legislative process for the better part of a decade. I returned to Hawaii in 2017 due to some family issues, including aging parents and ill relatives. So I'm happy to be here today on Maui. Next year will be the 100th anniversary of the birth of my maternal grandmother in Bahia. So I have some connection to this place, even though I haven't come here nearly enough because I'm always working in Honolulu. So today's, we're going to do some comments from our distinguished panelists today. We have briefly Council Member County Rawlings-Fernandez.
Chee-hoo.
Senator Jarrett Keaholole.
Yeah, you.
Alika Atay, farmer on island. Randy Gonce, I had the pleasure of serving with on the dual-use cannabis task force last year. My 2 gigs. The other was with the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct. And we also have Carrie and Shirota from the ACLU Policy Director, the ACLU of Hawaii. So cannabis has a long and rich history in human history, in our nation's history, and in our local history as well. Cannabis was effectively legal until 1937 with the passage of the Marijuana Stamp Tax Act. Cannabis has disproportionately impacted, cannabis prohibition has disproportionately impacted communities of color on the continent and Native Hawaiians here. Prior to our 2019 decriminalization statute, which is only 3 grams, which is less than an eighth, there were about 1,000 cannabis possession arrests each year, with a significant number of them, about a third, Native Hawaiians. Any conviction has collateral consequences. It impairs your ability to obtain sometimes education, employment, and housing. And it's especially severe if you have a felony conviction. I ran the numbers, and I believe a felony conviction in Hawaii has about 1,100 identifiable collateral consequences. There was an online database that escapes me right now, but it's worth looking into. Cannabis prohibition and drug prohibition and the criminal legal system, since the fall of the Hawaiian Nation, the overthrow of the Hawaiian Nation, has disproportionately had Native Hawaiians in its crosshairs. I highly recommend this fact sheet from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, which was published in 2014. It's entitled "The Impact of the Criminal Justice System on Native Hawaiians." And very briefly, it begins, the disparate impact of the criminal justice system on Native Hawaiians is apparent at every stage of the criminal justice system, starting from arrest and continuing through parole. The impact is cumulative, starting with a relatively small disproportionality at arrest, but revealing itself to be more distinct at sentencing and incarceration. This cycle repeats itself, and notably negative cyclical effects are concentrated on Native Hawaiian communities. So I'm grateful to the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement for putting adult use cannabis legalization and regulation on the table today. Hawaii was the first state in the nation to enact the medical cannabis statute via the legislature in 2000. California was the first in the nation through the ballot process, through the Compassionate Use Act of 1996, which I came to know very well. We can talk about the deficiencies of Hawaii's medical cannabis law, but that's a very long conversation, and I want to leave time for our panelists and Q&A. It took 15 years before the legislature enacted a bill to facilitate access to medical cannabis through the current dispensary system. It was a long time coming. I mentioned our decriminalization law that was passed in 2019. When you look at the numbers presented by the Uniform Crime Reporting data, it has operated to reduce cannabis arrests across the board. We're here to explore the potentialities of adult use cannabis legalization and regulation, which can include increasing the threshold that's immune from any criminal impact, as well as hopefully securing the rights of people to home grow and to collectively associate. So we'll begin with Councilmember Keane Rawlings-Fernandez, who I met just a few weeks ago at the Homelessness and Housing Solutions Conference at the Convention Center in New York. Great to see you again. She's going to talk about the resolution that the Maui County Council had in support of cannabis legalization a few years ago, and also talk about Native Hawaiian tradition and values, as well as how a prospective adult use cannabis economy can be a circular economy and can contribute to community self-sufficiency. Councilmember Fernandez was born and raised on Molokai and grew up in a family intimately connected to our Aina. This connection instilled in her the importance of the reciprocal relationship reflected in the proverb, Yali'i ka Aina, he kauwa, ke kanaka, or the land is chief, people its servants. She is honored to serve the people of and Aina of Molokai, Maui, Lanai, and Keaholole on the Maui County Council. She is working to ensure that the community's voice is put at the center of decision making, and that our Aina is protected, and that our people are cared for. Along with being a steward for our Aina, she is a wife and proud mother of 2 children. Her mission is to advance far-sighted, progressive policies to ensure that our precious families are not priced out of Hawaii and that our environment is protected for future generations. She believes in investments in education, affordable housing, and the local economy in order to keep Maui County a place where the next generation can create a vibrant future for all. Councilmember is a graduate of Molokai High and earned her bachelor's degree from Hawaii Pacific University and a Master of Business Administration from the University of Hawaii at Manoa and a JD from the William S. Richardson School of Law. Mahalo, Councilmember Fernandez.
Hello everyone, mahalo for joining us today. I'm so thankful to CNHA and to ACLU for hosting this panel. Very long time in the coming, and I hope we have luck this legislative session. So I introduced a resolution, and I believe we're the first county to, and I think, as I understand it, only county to take a public position in supporting the legalizing, regulating, and taxing of responsible adult use cannabis. At the time, it was the 2021 legislative session, and there were 5 different bills that were introduced at the legislative session, and the resolution intended to support passage of the different bills, but advocated for different components to ensure that it promoted equitable ownership and employment opportunities, to decrease disparities in life outcomes and marginalized communities, grant clemency or resentencing to anyone incarcerated on a marijuana conviction and expunging all marijuana convictions, and to create a democratically selected Hawaii Cannabis Control Board. At the time, well, I guess even now. So I was asked to kind of speak to what my colleagues on the council and those that testified had to say in support of the resolution, but also those that shared concerns. And so those that were, supportive of this initiative, of course, was supportive of diversifying the state's economy by developing another revenue generator, increasing access to, its medicinal purpose, the medicinal purpose of cannabis, as well as making this as a medicine more affordable to those who needed it. And recognizing this as a revenue generator, when we see the effects of climate change and years of colonization and exploitation of our Aina and Vai, we see the kind of devastation that's happened here in West Maui. And had this passed in 2021, we would have been able to roll out a program that would be generating revenue now, and possibly not have such a severe impact to both our county and state budget. Lahaina generates a good percentage of the transit accommodation tax and GET. The county, for the first time, will be collecting on a 0.5% surcharge starting January 1st on GET. And so, all of these things are impacted when we continue to kick the proverbial can down the road and drag our feet in making the decisions on behalf of what the community has been asking for years. The concerns that were raised were primarily two concerns. One, that there were a lot of questions about the rollout of the program and how regulation would work, and so just questions about driving impaired, preventing minors from using cannabis. But what the clear divide was, from my perspective, was a generational divide. My colleagues that grew up in the era of the war against drugs and all the propaganda against cannabis use, and instead of it being recognized as the medicine that it is in I guess all kind of ailments, and particularly where we have such a lack in mental health care. There's a lot of conditioning that's hard to undo, and so yeah. But we passed it out unanimously in 2021, and that position remains the council's public position. And as I continue to build relationships on the other councils, it's something that I can, on behalf of the communities, share with other councils if they want to use that as a template to introduce their own resolution and take public positions, so that we as counties can stand united on behalf of the community for the legalizing of adult use cannabis.
Next up is Senator Jarrett Keaholole. I first came across his name when I first came back to Hawaii, and he was the legislator who asked the Legislative Reference Bureau to explore ways that our state could be more like Portugal in its drug policy. Needless to say, this is America, and we don't quite have the public infrastructure that Portugal has, but maybe we'll get there one day. Senator Jarrett Keaholole is a proud 7th generation resident of the 24th Senate District, including Kaneohe and Kailua. He serves on the Senate leadership team as an assistant majority whip, and is currently the chair of the Commerce and Consumer Protection Committee, which is responsible for business regulation, including insurance, banking, telecommunications, public utilities, licensing, and consumer protection. He also serves as a member of the Hawaiian Affairs and Transportation, Culture and the Arts Committees. and is the co-chair of the Native Hawaiian Caucus. Senator Keaholole received a BA from the University of Hawaii at Manoa and a law degree from the William S. Richardson School of Law. He is married to his wife, Ku'ulani, and together they have 3 children. Mahalo, Senator Keaholole.
No question, I just gotta go in.
Yeah? Okay. Questions for later.
Sure.
Don't filibuster us now.
No, it's okay. I think the best place to start is where we left off at the end of the legislative session in 2023 that adjourned the first week of May. For, I believe, the first time, I'm not sure, but I think for the first time, an adult use legalization bill was heard and passed out of the Hawaii State Senate this last year by a vote of 22-3. So there are 25 senators in the Hawaii State Senate, 22 voted yes, 2 were in solid opposition on policy grounds, and 1, Senator Awa, supported the measure in committee but voted no on the floor because he was opposed to the level of regulation that we ultimately decided to propose in the bill. So not fundamentally opposed to legalization, but opposed because he had different opinions on the way the framework should have been set up, and is actually, I'm told, proposing his own legislation this year. So if we could find a way to meet minds on this, you have on the record a vote in support for adult use legalization from 23 out of 25 senators in the Hawaii State Senate. In addition, after initially having just about every State Department agency with some sort of connection to a legalization measure, including the Department of Health, the Department of Law Enforcement, Public Safety, and the Attorney General's office, all submitting testimony in opposition to adult use legalization. After conferring with several of those agencies on the fact that this governor, when campaigning to become the governor, openly supported legalization, we were able to secure a commitment from the Attorney General of the state of Hawaii to work with us in this interim to propose amendments to the legislation that we moved out of the Senate that would put in place the appropriate regime, authority, and regulatory framework that they would be comfortable with. Not necessarily to support, but to not oppose if the legislature elected to legalize adult use cannabis. So as it stands right now, I believe 3 days ago, we received the first draft of a proposal from the State Attorney General's office, which is 294 pages long, and is modeled essentially after the Massachusetts, the state of Massachusetts adult use cannabis regime that we're reviewing right now. So I do, I have spoken to other colleagues. I do intend to reintroduce legislation because although the bill that crossed over to the House, as you folks know, is still alive, appropriate protocol for big bills like this is to start all over again in the second year of a legislature. We have 2-year legislative cycles. So just because the bill dies in the first year doesn't mean it dies, it just stops and we readdress it in the next year. But because the bill has changed so dramatically, our intention is to reintroduce the new measure, which is about 154-page overlay on the bill we passed out last year, and to resubmit it to the public for hearings again. Part of the process that we worked on over the summer was collaborative with members of the House. Ultimately, we have to rehear the bill and pass it out of the Senate, so there's never a guarantee, although there is a public position that's been taken on the measure by all 25 members of the Senate. And we will see what, you know, our partner chamber elects to do. I can tell you throughout the process there were a number of different concerns that were brought up from members in the legislature. And people tend to, when the legislature doesn't take action that they want, people tend to just immediately go to the corruption or the black hand as the reason for why the measure didn't go the way they wanted to, or why the individual legislator didn't vote the way they wanted to. But I can tell you a lot of the concerns that were brought up that we tried to address throughout the process were concerns that were reflected in the public testimony by members of our community. There are a lot of different ways to set up a cannabis legalization regime. There are a lot of experts on this panel that can speak to that. And so what we were trying to do was to create a legalization framework that accounted for as many of those different concerns as possible, taking into account several dozen states that have already gone before us and set up their regimes, had successes, had some spectacular failures, and to try to be the most responsible and comprehensive as we possibly could be. Also taking into account the fact that, like I said, if it is eventually taken up by our partner chamber in the House, that they will likely have their own take on how the bill should be done, and will likely make amendments or potentially introduce their own framework that we're gonna have to work out. Politics, the legislative process is messy. It's messy by design. It's slow on purpose, and the more engagement and the more transparency we have to the process, I believe the better product you end up with, and the easier it is to have the community coalesce around a general understanding of what it is we want to do and how we do it. So that's where we stand right now. I am happy going forward to share out the draft that we have received for for comment and dialogue. That's not the final draft, and that's not the version that I intend to introduce when we get into the legislative session on January 17th. But it is a framework that has been proposed by the top law enforcement officer in the state of Hawaii, which I think is a significant, that is a measure of significant progress on this issue. That doesn't mean it's gonna make everybody happy, right? But we now have a position by the Attorney General of the state of Hawaii that we did not have ever on this issue. So, progress. Thank you.
Before we get to Liga, I just want to underscore the critical importance it is to have gubernatorial leadership on this issue. I was at the International Drug Policy Reform Conference in Phoenix just last month and heard a magnificent presentation from folks working on the ground in Minnesota. And their governor helped facilitate an adult use cannabis regime, and their lieutenant governor was also pretty important. It was a Native American woman. At the same time, they also had some far-reaching drug policy reform measures that received less attention. They repealed their state paraphernalia law in its entirety, which has been introduced by House Judiciary Chair Representative Tarnas. They also decriminalize unusable traces and residue, which is something that I've been trying to float across the transom for the last 5 years. So I encourage everybody in this room to send a short message of support to Governor Green and let him know that you attended this and that hopefully you're supportive of moving forward on adult use cannabis. And a big reason for legalizing and regulating adult use cannabis is to create an economic sector where Native people, hopefully, our Native Hawaiian community can thrive. This is an opportunity to move toward a more land-based economy, to diversify our economic product. Hawaii cannabis will have a very large cachet in the emerging national market, cannabis market, as well as the potentially one day the international cannabis market. So we have a real critical opportunity here very soon to lay the groundwork for Hawaii to be a leader in this. So with that, I'd like to introduce our Alika Atay, who was born in Hana, He moved to the Wailuku Kahului area when he began receiving formal education at St. Anthony's School in Wailuku, and later boarded at Kamehameha schools. After graduating from Kamehameha schools, he attended Hastings College in Nebraska, where he acquired a bachelor's degree in physical education and another one in biology. Alika returned to Maui in 1977 and has resided in central Maui since. For over 30 years, Alika has worked and volunteered, serving the youth of Maui at Maui Economic Opportunity Incorporated, Hui Malama Learning Center, Kamehameha Schools, and Kihei Youth Center. In 2014, Alika helped lead the Maui Citizens Initiative ballot, asking voters to ban genetically modified crops in Maui County, and served as a Maui County Council member. Ever since, Alika has focused on farming and food sovereignty. He describes himself as a grower of food, of good healthy plants and medicine, using Kanaka indigenous natural farming methods practiced for centuries. Mahalo for joining us today.
Thank you. You know, when Carrie asked me for a bio, I said, I don't have no bio. Just put I'm a natural farmer, but I guess she searched the internet and got all that stuff. But anyways, it's a pleasure and honor to be present on this panel today, just to represent the Kanaka growers, Kanaka farmers, Kanaka medical patients that need this important medicine, and to have access to it. I was very excited that the Senate had passed it forward, very disappointed that the House did. And so I was anxiously awaiting when I had heard that the Attorney General volunteered to take this on and to present a policy moving this forward for adult use cannabis. I'm a cannabis grower. Right now, I currently grow hemp. People confuse hemp and cannabis as two separate plants. It's not. It's the same plant. It's cannabis. It's just that some of the cultivars and genetic dispositions we produce out of hemp does not have THC. We have cannabinoids that are CBD, CBG, THCA, and 140 other cannabinoids. Yes, cannabis was legal up until the 1930s, which also included hemp. Cannabis is hemp. And cannabis was made into rope and a lot of other industrial products. Cannabis was fed to the cattle, fed to the chicken, which is how the humans got their cannabinoids when they ate the beef in the early 20s and 1900s. As humans, our bodies has an endocannabinoidal system that is awaiting to receive cannabinoids to heal your body, heal your mind. It's just that we now have the flowering portion of the cannabis, which is the sensimilla, the flower, and the THC. This is where we talk about adult use recreation. Yes, I'm a farmer, and I'm confident that through our Hawaiian indigenous natural agriculture practices, which is Hina, and if you're from Maui, you know who Hina is, the mother of our god Maui. And as we grow, we bring together the cultural and spiritual aspects of growing with the science aspect of growing plants. But as I mentioned the other day, you know, the challenge of farmers is three objectives. One, to grow the mostest, in others, the most abundant in volume per acre. Two, to grow the biggest, because that's how everybody wants to brag. I got the biggest, yeah. And then the last is the most flavorful, the most tastiest, that this, you know, brings out the best. As peanut farmers, that's the same goal we have. We focus on growing food and medicine. And in this panel, I turn to the production of medicine for cannabis. And I'm very excited for the future opportunity for the Kanaka farmers that live here within state. And with interest, I'm interested in legislation for the true representation of addressing social equity for Kanaka. Social equity for those who live here, not an opportunity for people and corporations to come here and just because they have hundreds of millions from the other cannabis markets that exist, that they can come into our state. And so I stand here pleading to Senator to not forget the people, the community, and always look at the true social equity. And I look at it sometimes referring back to the Hawaii constitutional law, the creation of the admissions of Hawaii into the US, possibly under 5F or possibly under Article 10, where 20% of every business, of every entity, should be going back in representation with the Kanaka. So my question then was, from the previous medical marijuana licenses, there were 9 licenses. Of those licenses, how many of them were Kanaka? We know the answer.
Zero.
And so going forward, we're going, don't forget the people who live here, in making sure we get true representation in social equity. Social equity, the data, the report that you shared from the Office of Hawaiian Affairs about the incarceration rate and the representation of Hawaiians incarcerated, not only Hawaiians, you add Polynesians. How many of them are currently in prison because of cannabis? Yeah, and so we really have to look at that. And then the other legislation I look at is they're there because they were expert growers. They go there, they serve their time. They done the punishment. But when they come out, they still get punishment because they cannot use their ike and their master growing methods that they can share to grow good medicine because they're a felon. You know, I'm going, these guys are decades OG farmers that know how to grow the best, but we penalize them, yeah, of not helping us grow the best because they're recorded felon. You know, and so I sure hope that legislation and policy will be created to accommodate our people, yeah, who have been spending decades there and come out, they served their time, they did their time, should be squashed, they should be part of the workforce. So I truly look for, thank you to the ACLU, you know, I truly look for legislative representation of that. I want to have the opportunity to review this 294 page document from the AG. We did get information that potentially it'll come from laws out of Massachusetts. I want to share another concern from hindsight, is to really evaluate the strength of vertical integration in the process of running the businesses. In other words, the one licensee, the same company, gotta be involved with the growing, gotta be involved with the processing, gotta be involved with the manufacturing, gotta be involved with the transportation, gotta be involved with packaging and distribution and retail operations. I've been to California, Northern California, visited the dispensaries, several dispensaries, and I saw a market of horizontal marketing, horizontal involvement. I saw a room full of backyard growers, mom and pops, OG farmers, holding their box of flowers, holding their box of candy, sitting in the room, the representative of the dispensary grabs the box, gets a label, takes a small sample, locks the box in a locker, gives the lady the ticket, says, come back in 4 days, we're gonna run the test on your product. They return 4 days later, the product, the result of the testing is shared. If it's 100% cleared, 100% good, to be able to be put on the shelves for distribution, they receive a ticket of whatever the sales price was done, and it's a go. Yeah, grandma and grandpa are participants in the economic opportunity cycle of this industry. How do we stretch it across from island to island, community to community, to truly have people involvement? And so that's why I'd be a proponent of a consideration of a horizontal market. I look at the current medical marijuana licensees, and on Maui in particular, there was one license. There were allowed 2 grow sites, 2 stores. This particular one only had 1 grow site, 1 store. The grow site got infected. Yeah. They had to destroy all the products. How long take for regrow from seed to get a fully mature harvest?
6 to 9
product?
months.
Fully vertical integration, what happens down the line? In the store, there is no product for the patients. 2-3 months, they gotta wait. If there was a horizontal market, you get product for the customers. So these are things that I want to introduce and look at and say, how can we do things better? How can we make this industry a kako thing, yeah, that everyone can benefit? My concern is that it's been 8 years since the legalization of medical marijuana licenses. 8 years, these 9 businesses been grandfathered and protected and babied, yeah? When we, the Kanaka farmers, don't get a chance to participate, yeah? I don't wanna see that when the legislation comes, should it pass, that these 9 get grandfathered and protected and babied, and the rest of us can join in. We gotta go wait until our turn comes. No, it should be open for all, compete. I was one on Maui, there were two licenses allowed. We applied, we got 3rd place, yeah, so we didn't get selected. There were 2 that went in on Maui. We're still waiting for the opportunity to apply to get a license. So I represent farmers on every island, and we get OG farmers. I mean, they're all waiting, but patiently waiting. But thank you for this opportunity.
We'll have, yeah.
I know it's
We'll have questions and answers after our panel, but did you wanna?
I just was curious if you had an answer or any insight into why specifically Massachusetts was the one, only because I'm from Massachusetts, and that immediately lit off a light bulb in my head, because it's very homogenous there, there's complaints about that, and so I instantly thought maybe equity is gonna be a problem, so I just didn't know if you had any insight, but, sorry.
I don't have any direct insight into that, and I don't know if the senator has any insight. I just know that our judiciary chair on the House side and his legal team took a look at adult use states. I think he was particularly attracted to the work of the Parabola Center in Massachusetts. But our next speaker is going to talk about social equity, and when we talk about social equity, and by the way, for those of you unfamiliar with a lot of the terminology here, like we talk about vertical integration, the difference between hemp and cannabis, which, you know, they're cousins of the same strain. At the suggestion of Council Member Rawlings-Fernandez here, I made a glossary of cannabis terms, and you'll feel free to take a look at that. One of the real challenges in states that have legalized and regulated adult use cannabis is the presence of multi-state operators. these multi-billion-dollar, although given their stock prices recently, maybe not multi-billion-dollar anymore, organizations that are, very large, and they're very dominant in the marketplace. At the same time, we do have people on the continent looking at the craft cannabis industry, which are small local producers, even contemplating direct-to-consumer sales at some point. Maine is a very big state on that front. There's a National Craft Cannabis Coalition that might be worth looking into. And when we think about moving from a very restrictive medical model, and I just want to editorialize here a bit on our medical cannabis statute, our Department of Health has been very, very reticent in expanding the size and the scope of our medical cannabis program. 2 working groups, including last year's task force, have recommended science-based cannabis education on medical cannabis for the public, and nothing. They don't allow dispensaries to do pre-rolls, even though it's in statute. They've also been very reticent to expand the list of qualifying conditions. In my view, the list of qualifying conditions under our medical cannabis regime just needs to go. All you need is a recommendation from an APRN or another, or a doctor, if you can find a doctor who provides one. It was very easy in California. You go in, you give them your medical history, you give them your ailment, and I had a long chiropractic, record, so that was, as he said, that was gold, but I needed it at the time. And yeah, we have a lot of work to do on the medical cannabis front too. I think, the legislature has talked about, and the Senate has passed, employment protections for medical cannabis patients. To me, this is easy stuff. The chambers of commerce may not see it that way, so maybe we'll have to first take a look at state and government employees, but that kind of protection is long overdue. So next up, we have Randy Gonce, who I had the pleasure of serving with on the dual use cannabis task force. He's now the principal consultant at Hawaii Cannabis Industry Solutions, which helps people and businesses navigate the complicated world of legal cannabis. He has over a decade of experience in advocacy in Hawaii and half a decade in drug reform policy. Professionally, Randy is a long-standing board member of the Drug Policy Forum, hooray, the former executive director of the Hawaii Cannabis Industry Association, and a former member of the dual use of cannabis task force, as I alluded to. And he served as the chair and author of the Social Equity Committee report. Additionally, Randy brings over 20 years of legacy market cannabis relationships and experience from growing to distribution. So mahalo for joining us today, Randy.
My pleasure. Yeah, so my portion, I really want to touch on social equity and also the economics around the cannabis space. A lot of my, I would say the past 3 or 4 years, focus has been on what have other states been doing, what regime has Hawaii set up, and how can we move in a way that it is most advantageous for Hawaii and Hawaii's residents. The social equity report we put together on the dual use task force, I think it was close to 40 or 50 pages. Nikos was on our committee. It was really great. We were able to do a statewide tour. We went to each island, set up a listening tour to talk to individuals who would want to have input on what does social equity mean to you, and who should qualify, and what should come of this. And a lot of what we found was things that needed to happen all around the country around social equity, but have yet to be implemented. So I take a piece from the Minority Cannabis Industry Association, the MCBA. Their president, Kaliko, actually Native Hawaiian individual who lives in California, a good friend of mine. They have a quote from their 2022 National Cannabis Equity Report that says, "Not one program," this is across the nation in legal in the United States, "not one program has resulted in an equitable cannabis industry on all 4 measures," and they have 4 measures that they use. It's the industry, it's justice, it's community, and it's access. So equitable industry would be promoting the inclusion and success of minorities in the cannabis industry through equal access and opportunities and resources. Equitable communities is empowering and supporting communities most impacted by the war on drugs through community reinvestment, corporate responsibility, initiatives, and social programming. Equitable justice would be reducing arrests and imprisonment for nonviolent cannabis offenses and restore basic rights of citizenship to individuals with nonviolent cannabis offenses. And then the equitable access piece is ensure safe legal access products are available to immigrants, veterans, seniors, disabled persons without risk of loss of benefits or immigration status. And to this point, you know, up until where we are now, Hawaii hasn't had a social equity program. We have, when we implemented a regime back in 2015, what was put in place was something that the legislature could agree on at the time. The market around the nation was still pretty adolescent. A lot of these concepts around social equity were starting to pop up, but didn't really have a strong foothold. And it was kind of the lowest common denominator that could come out of the legislature. So it's been an uphill battle to get a lot of these priorities put in place. I got the chance to be the director of the Hawaii Cannabis Industry Association for a few years, and I took it as kind of my role to kind of enter in what I consider the belly of the beast, of go inside of all these policies and things that were implemented and see where there's opportunities. Opportunities to insert these conversations, but opportunities to set up what is currently in place, that when we do have a legalization regime, there are things that will help crack the door open a little bit for these conversations. I think throughout this conversation, this panel, we can dive into a little bit of what the social equity report was able to discuss and propose. And you know, as an individual, you know, a malahini to this place, I didn't feel it was right for me to prescribe anything. So what we did on the committee was provide kind of like a mixed plate of options. So these are what we found around the nation that has worked, what hasn't worked. This is what we can see be really impactful. And then looking at the specific economics of cannabis around the nation and where we are today. This isn't the green rush that was, you know, I would say 10 years ago. The economics of cannabis are really difficult. And the opportunity to get into this industry will be there, and hopefully we push for an equitable space, but there is a zero guarantee that you're going to be successful. I think the labor statistics from the federal government says about 70% of small businesses fail within the first 3 years. In the cannabis space, it's up to 90%. And a lot of individuals saw this as a really great opportunity, would mortgage their home, jump into the cannabis space, and given the regulations, given the difficulties of federal regulations, you can't find banking, you can't file bankruptcy if your business doesn't do well, you can't get a business loan, you have to pay double the taxes essentially, because you can't write off your taxes as a business. So it's a very difficult place to be, and to haphazardly legalize and allow people to mortgage their second home and then be in a worse position than they were before was something that we are hopeful to prevent here in Hawaii, and make sure that when it does roll out, that it's something that can be a controlled space, so it doesn't open up and tank the market and everyone lose out in the first 2 years. And it's something that is sustainable for the future to come. And I've worked with a lot of these individuals on this panel for a long time. Honored to be here. I've put my hands in the eye with Uncle Alika a couple times, texting back and forth during when these bills are going through, working on the resolution with Councilmember Rawlings, and it is a long time coming. It's been a while since Hawaii has been up to speed on this topic, but we have a lot of individuals who are akamai now and are willing to put their neck out and push. So I'm hopeful that this next year we'll have a really great discussion. And it's going to be an uphill battle of making sure everything we want is going to be present, but it's one that I think it's a worthwhile battle to have. So please bring all your questions. We're happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Randy. So, social equity is one. I fear that sometimes social equity gets talked about as sort of an add-on program to the adult use regulatory model. And I think we need to give serious consideration in this state to building in social equity into the enabling legislation. how best can we incorporate the expertise of legacy growers? How best can we, provide licenses, to farmers, to local farms, small production, batch farmers, craft farmers, whatever nomenclature you want to use. How do we create a market that invites broad participation from our communities on every island? Every island has legacy growers. I've seen on the internet, I've seen some of the magnificent strains grown by these legacy growers. How do we reward them and include them in a prospective cannabis economy, instead of just signing it off to a few select companies who may or may not sell to one of the large multi-state operators, and then we get cannabis and cannabis products coming from the continent and drowning out all of that kind of participation. So next up, we have Carrie Shirota, who is the policy director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Hawaii. She's going to talk about civil rights and liberty and looking at cannabis through an equity lens. Carrie Ann is a, what? Oh. She told me to skip her bio. Here's Carrie Ann.
Because I know we're running out of time and I know many of you have questions. And so I'm going to jump through some slides. And some of this data, you already know about it, but I think we need to keep it front and center because we're going to talk about zooming out and our interest. I'm not an expert on cannabis like Uncle Alika and others here, but what we are standing for is for justice, and we know who's been disparately impacted. And so I want to talk about cannabis legalization, but I also want to talk about clemency, which is a way to get relief and to release people now. So who we are. Many of you may know about our national organization. We have the local affiliate here. We've been in existence since 1965. We don't take any government money. As you know, we have some high-profile cases, typically around issues like free speech, Bill of Rights, abortion access, LGBTQ issues. But we've also for many years advocated to stop the war on drugs because we know it's a failure. We know it costs tons of money. We know that it harms families, communities, and we can do better. So we currently have a campaign called Smart Justice, and the two overarching goals. One is to decrease the number of people in our jails and prisons by 50%. And that is totally possible. We can even go beyond that, and we should. The second part of it is also to reduce the racial disparities in our criminal legal system, which we know has been happening for decades. Report after report that collects on dust on shelves. And there's all of these recommendations about how to decarcerate, and yet we keep doing the same thing over and over. And we know that the war on drugs included cannabis, and that has led to more people being locked up. So we know that there are ways to build safer communities, and it involves decarceration strategies that have worked in other places and other states, and we can do it here too. So just a kind of quick national landscape. The U.S. does incarcerate more people than any other nation. We're supposed to be the land of freedom, the brave, and yet we lock up almost 2 million people a year. If you look at the incarceration rate, we incarcerate 664 per 100,000 people, the highest of any other country. So where does Hawaii stand? If you look at it from this perspective, we incarcerate 439 per 100,000 people. That's higher. We're in the top 25 incarcerators in the world, higher than places like South Africa, Iran, Russia. Again, but this wasn't always the case. We know that we look back in time to Hawaii, that was not the case in locking up all of our people and punishing. So where are we at today? This just gives you a quick snapshot. We have, on a positive note, started to reduce the number of people in our jails and prisons through proven strategies of decarceration, but we need to do more. There's been definitely a decrease in our youth system, which is something we need to replicate for adults, comprehensive services for youth and their families. But we also want to note that the carceral system is not just people who are in our jails and prisons, or those that we export to private prisons out of state. It also includes people who are under legal supervision. Because if you look at this, at any given time, people who are on probation or parole can easily slip back and be incarcerated. Because even though there's a trend, right, to legalize, currently now, if someone, quote, tests dirty for cannabis, marijuana, their probation, parole, supervisory leave, that can be the ticket right back into jail or prison. And so this vicious cycle continues and continues. And another data point, because also we have Senator here too, relating to this is the importance of probation reform. Hawaii, unfortunately, has the highest, the number one, the longest length of probation compared to any other states in the United States, at an average of 6 years. The longer you're under supervision, the greater likelihood you're gonna get a technical violation for missing an appointment, cannabis, alcohol, and you're right back into this vicious cycle. This is a quick snapshot too, a little more recent. It does show a trend in reducing the number of people inside. And I just want to note though, it said here 34% of people who are pre-trial, but actually it is much higher. On OCCC, where they're planning to potentially build a new jail, last count, if you exclude people on furlough, 78% of the people who are in OCCC were pre-trial, meaning never been convicted, they're locked up because they're too poor basically to afford bail. And so this is part of the carceral system, which the war on drugs is a part of that. Some of the data that Nikos highlighted, this is from Office of Foreign Affairs, this is from 2010. That shows the deeper you go into the criminal legal system, the crimes are disparately represented from general population to arrest, incarceration, to parole revocations. I understand that OHA is going to be doing a new data report, and hopefully we'll see some trends decrease in certain areas, but there's still so much more work to do. This also shows when we look at racial ethnic disparities in Hawaii, you can clearly see that Native Hawaiians, as well as Pacific Islanders, as well as Black, also Filipinos are also disparately represented in our jails and prisons. So we need to look at this collectively and what we can do to decarcerate. We all know the harmful outcomes of incarceration. This is really just a continuation of colonial cycles, reinforcing poverty, and there's, again, different ways of community safety. But I want to jump to this part, because part of it, again, is we hope that there's going to be legalization with social equity, but we can't just wait for that. Simultaneously, there are efforts to work towards what we call clean slate laws, where there's an automated system. Instead of people, if they are eligible for expungement, to do a paper, pay money, have people process it, in a handful of states, they've enacted clean slate, where they use the power technology to harness criminal records, meaning that after a period of time, that person's criminal record can be, quote, expunged and sealed, so that it doesn't come back if they want to apply for a job, if they want to get housing, all of the collateral consequences that we talk about. And so there is a movement here in Hawaii also too. When you look at the number of people, some of the data that we got, almost half the population, and people like, what, how is that case? But it was funny because in one expungement hearing that we were in, a testifier looked up the records of all the, I think it was a House panelist. All of them but one had some kind of court record. Because a court record can even be a traffic, right? So, and if you have fines and it accumulates and you can't pay it, then you can get to a license stopper. So all of the ways that we sort of like, again, codify this harm, it keeps building and building. So even though we joke about it, it goes to say that if we do clean slate, it will impact and help a lot of people. What are some lessons that we can learn from criminal justice, from both reform advocates and abolitionists, is that the way it is now, people think that automatically crime rises and so we need to lock up more people. But in a number of states that have decarcerated, they've reduced the number of people in their jails and prisons, saved money, and reinvested that money back into the most under-resourced communities. Housing, education, violence prevention programs, after-school programs, substance abuse treatment. And what they found in those states is that not only did the number of people reduce in the jails and prisons, but also the crime rates in both violent and property type crimes reduce. Because now you're stabilizing the community by investing in what communities need instead of just mass punishment. So those are just some quick strategies, and I'm running through this. There's tons of strategies to decarcerate, and I think the lesson for us and for policymakers and stakeholders is there's no one magic bullet right to this. If we invest in all of these different strategies, we can continue to decarcerate to 50% and more. but I wanna highlight that part of it is decriminalizing drugs, but also legalization. And that 2019 bill that passed that decriminalizes marijuana, it's now quote a violation for a certain amount, it's still not enough. We actually went to the judiciary, to the AGs, and we've asked, of the people who are charged with this violation, how many people have had their records expunged? And there's no data to support that people are getting their records expunged, which goes back to, if you have it on your record, it's a lifetime, basically a barrier. And what can we do now? I also want to highlight here some other areas, sentencing reform, clemency, and we're going to talk in the next slide what we can do now. So many of you may have heard that President Biden, just with the stroke of a pen, used his clemency powers to pardon people with simple marijuana possession. I think at last count, federal marijuana possession, over 6,000 people. But more people get convicted of marijuana at the state level. It's considered a state level crime. We're talking about thousands of people who have been incarcerated for cannabis use. There was a HCR 51, which is a resolution passed this session in 2023, urging the governor to create and implement a cannabis clemency program. And what that means is that regardless of what happens to legalization, which we hope it moves with social equity and expungement, is that the governor, Green, with a stroke of a pen, can also pardon people for cannabis and potentially other types of offenses in the future. But we're working, literally, we've met with the Attorney General's office, we've met with the governor's policy team, with the Hawaii Criminal Justice Data Center, to say, we can't just wait. This is what we can do now. And as an example, Governor Kate Brown, who is former governor of Oregon, she's considered a clemency superstar. With a stroke of a pen, over 40,000 people had their marijuana convictions pardoned. And so this is something we worked on now. And as we move forward, there's some flyers there about clemency cannabis. You can always reach out to Governor and his team and say, use your powers now. And we'd like to see it more broadly used, not only for those with cannabis, for pupuna who are locked up who do not need to be there. There's so many categories of people that can come home, and the governor can do that under the Constitution right now. And so I just want to turn it over because I know many of you have questions. Thank you so much for being here, and please feel free to stand up and move around because I know it's late and it's the end of the day. And I think with that, questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.
Part of her biography is that Carrie Ann is a graduate of Alton High, a graduate of the William S. Richardson School of Law at Manoa. So Richardson is very well represented on this panel. Before we take questions from the audience, I just wanted to offer the following bullet points, and if any of our panelists wanted to respond to them, they can feel free, or we can engage in dialogue with it all. Transform UK is a drug policy reform organization that's issued a really good guide called How to Regulate Cannabis, a Practical Guide, available in PDF form. I met the author at the Drug Policy Reform Conference last month. It's in its 3rd edition. Cannabis policy in the United Kingdom is not great, unfortunately, but it offered the following aims and objectives for any adult use regulatory model. 1, respect, protect, and promote human rights. 2, protect and promote public health. 3, promote social equity, improve development opportunities, and ensure communities most impacted by prohibition are included in policy development. And finally, and this is a non-exhaustive list, protect against excessive corporate influence on policy making. So I ask any of you if you have responses to that, and my initial, I want to just say something about public health and the continued criminalization of poverty and behavioral health issues in Hawaii and in the larger nation. we have waged a long war on people from under-resourced communities, people from indigenous communities, people who use substances, people who have mental health problems. And the sooner we move away from a punitive model that's still embraced by many of our prosecutors on this issue, including our Honolulu prosecutor, who is kind of on the warpath, so to speak, against cannabis. He wants to keep Hawaii, Hawaii by bringing in radical right-wing people from the continent. And it's just kind of the state we're in right now. In my view, we can embrace things like alternative responder mechanisms, people experiencing a mental health crisis. We can decriminalize small amounts of drugs. We need to also expand opportunities to get substance use treatment on demand without a long wait list, and provide health care to people. We also need to provide something like a basic income to folks. Right now, the basic, cash payment got reduced in recent years from the state. So there are whole varieties of ways that, our state, which classifies itself the Aloha state, can better embody aloha and those from our under-resourced communities. Panelists, anybody want to take a shot at any of what I just offered? Seeing none, I'll take questions from the audience.
Well, so, okay, let me
Oh,
jump in. I think,
Senator.
one of there are several pillars, so to speak, of our priorities of the bill that we are trying to work out right now, including the Attorney General's version. And one of the items of feedback that we got from several states was that states that attempted to provide a social equity program years after they enacted legalization were doomed to fail. And that it needs to be a fundamental component of a legalization measure. And so that is a priority going forward, to make sure that it comes off, that it initiates at the beginning of legalization instead of something that is phased in thereafter. My understanding of the Attorney General's proposal is that there is a legislative appropriation attached to that in order to make sure that there is funding available to initiate a program like that right out of the gate. So I know that it is something that is going to be a priority, and it was actually one of the pieces of feedback that we got from Massachusetts, that their social equity program failed because it was initiated years after the program started. So, the policy prerogative of the Senate last year was to provide a pathway for growers who have traditionally grown in Hawaii to be able to enter the market and become licensed. Not just the co-ops, but like the Kanatazara and the Koibis, that have been doing this. And part of the reasoning for that is that the medical regime that exists right now limits the number of retail sites, and there has always been a discomfort in the legislature with authorizing more retail sites within the dispensary regime, because of a concern that the retail sites now are in Kona and Kahului and Waikiki, and if we authorize more, then we'll just get more retail sites in Kona and Kahului and Waikiki, and so people in rural communities with access issues are not able to, in the medical regime, even access that. So, and then I'll close by saying that the Senate bill that we passed last year, which is the sort of bare bones for this Attorney General draft, included a transition to a horizontal framework. It included craft licenses in line with the main model, and was an attempt to create a licensing regime that prevented large-scale operators, primarily the national operators, from coming in and consolidating licenses Because what has happened over the years, we found, is in states that just say go and legalize, you get an overabundance of applicants who eventually fail when the market starts to mature and gets highly competitive, which gives you two good, a good and a bad. The price goes down, but because of the competition, the big guys will come in and they'll start to gobble everybody up. And the last thing we want in Hawaii is a bunch of national conglomerates shipping in national products and controlling access to the market. What we want, and everyone, including medical, has said, is they would prefer a manufacturing base that's centered on Hawaii, so that a manufacturing base that is economically viable, that creates terroir. Like when you drink champagne, you know the thing is from France, otherwise you're drinking sparkling wine, right? So that was the intention of the legislation that we passed last year. That was the understanding of the priority for the Senate when the Attorney General got on board to draft. So we would welcome comments on that, but that is the goal, at least on our side, is to make sure that there is no takeover and consolidation. And then out of the gate, this is a market that we have the distinct advantage, the same way we did during COVID, to be very aggressive to try and stabilize our healthcare system. We do not have to, at this moment in time, worry about aggressive competitor product from the continent, because they are not allowed to bring it in. And so there is a window here to try and establish an economy, in case, if ever, the federal government does move toward schedule. I personally believe that that's not likely to happen anytime soon. So there is an opportunity here to allow local establishments and operators and the product to be grown and distributed and manufactured locally. So we're trying to, at least on the Senate side, the prerogative was to move forward with those priorities in mind.
Thank you.
And I'll add, the best medicine for a lot of the mental health issues is land back. But as we work toward INA back initiatives, cannabis does help to cope with the theft of our land, the theft of our government, and the theft of our Hawai'i and resources. So one of the ways I think, I don't know if it can be included in this legislation, but I would love for it to be included, is farming on homesteads. And then that way we know for sure Kanaka is being centered in this industry.
Can you share some example, please, on, I'll be honest with you, the national conglomerates is already trying to come in. The issue of social equity legislation has been reverberated to them. So they're trying to figure how to partner up with Kanaka, so that they get a Kanaka base to come in. A couple of them have already visited us, but the ethos, our ethos is aloha aina, and always protect our aina. So I asked them, I said, well, how do you guys grow? We only grow indoors because we like to be clear and official medical. And we only want fire. In other words, they don't care. They just like the highest THC that they can produce. And oh yeah, Hawaii environment, because of our equatorial sun, whatever genetics you get, you give me 25%, because of our sun outdoors, we can get them to 28 to 30. We can give you the fire. But what is your practice of growing? And so they do this, what you call it, the wool. What is it? Rock wool. Rock wool, 1 foot block. Yeah. They float them in one vat. Yeah. Chemical water. So that's the wick of the fertilizer. That's how they fertilize, and then they put the plug in the middle, and then they feed them plenty of lights. They don't care. They don't care about the size. They just go sideways, produce buds. That's their goal. And I looked at them and I said, yeah, but that's all chemicals. How can you grow this plant and you call it medicine, but it's liquid chemical, and you're going to just put this on the shelf? They don't care. From the Aloha Aina aspect, I said, oh, but what you do after you harvest? What you do with your waste? What you do with the rock wool that is soaked in chemical? Oh, we just dump it. So for me, I'm going, wow, these guys who do that kind, they should get an Aloha Aina tax. You know? That's not sustainable, that's not practicing Aloha Aina. You know, and so they don't care. They just wanna come in, they know we get the market, they know we get X amount of millions of tourists that come, they know that the tourist customer spends 5 times more than a local customer. All they want is the dollar and the file. And I just flat out, you guys not Aloha Aina. We don't like working with you guys. But I'll let you know that the representatives of these multi-state conglomerates is hungry over Hawaii. Yeah,
If I could add, I think the importance of getting this right and doing it, relatively soon because of the continent and their industry growing so large can't be understated, and it's difficult to do. I mean, what we've seen in the national market currently, a lot of states started out with residency requirements to get a license in that state. That has been legally challenged, unfortunately, in some places, and has gone away. Same thing with social equity provisions that, which should, in my opinion, go towards certain ethnic backgrounds. People have been disadvantaged, have been shot down in court. So it makes it much more difficult to craft a piece of legislation that focuses in on certain areas or demographics. What we've seen to be effective is targeting zip codes that have been disproportionately, you can connect data to that have been disproportionately hurt while the war on drugs. But to craft a piece of legislation that specifically says X, Y, and Z without having a ton of legal challenges, you can get caught in court. And this is what happens. A lot of these larger entities that have hotshot lawyers can hold it up in court for years on end. So the task that these lawmakers have, that the attorney generals have, and everyone else to craft a law that is going to be in place that will help hopefully protect Hawaii, protect our residents, have something that's special for us, is a really tall order. But it's not unheard of, right? We have a lot of things to go off of now that other states have done it. But it is going to be very difficult. And it may not spell out in the law that says, the first 25 licenses go to everyone who lives in Eva Beach, right? It's not going to say these items per se, but the law will be written in a way that will give, in hopes, advantages to individuals who live here, who pay taxes here, that have been growing here. And there's ways to do that. And we can get into later, and I can give you guys the link. The social equity report we produced offers a lot of different opportunities and options for implementing these. And you have two sides. You have the market side, getting individuals into the market to run a business, and then the other side is, where's this tax money gonna go? And really, at the end of the day, who's made out the best in the cannabis market? It's been states and counties. They're able to take some money off the top and do what they please with it. And with the Akamai individuals in our state legislature and our counties, we can put that right towards reinvestment into communities. Have a grant operation fund that will put money into communities that need to increase farming, or give money to people who are farming cannabis and vegetables, or things for our community, right? So these opportunities are going to be very large, and that's where the really good opportunities are going to be with money in our cannabis space.
Thank you, Randy.
Yes,
Quickly, we'd like to get to audience questions.
I think because I saw people nodding their head, there actually have been some bills introduced by my senator here to allow for cannabis like on DHHL and homestead lands. Unfortunately, it hasn't moved very far, but there has been sentiment, it's part of DHHL's package, legislative package, coming from homesteaders to be able to grow on homesteads. That's something interesting. And then the second point of it that Randy just shared,
in California, these, after they legalize cannabis, a certain percentage of the money that's the government receives from tax is reinvested into these reintegration programs for people who are coming out of jail and prison to help them get comprehensive support services to be successful, moving out with their family, have housing, treatment, employment opportunities. So that's happening in California. I've actually talked to people who are doing that work, and they said that getting that money makes a tremendous amount of difference because it's a source of funding that's being reinvested back into the very communities that have been under-resourced and disproportionately communities of color. So it can also be done and embedded into the law here.